Why don't you introduce the people to the hilarious clip I came across involving Dave Rubin getting owned casually?
Yes, you get full credit for this. Apparently, he got owned a couple of times. He went on this Daily Caller show. It's called Jason and Vince and Jason. There we go. Save the Nation. And it's a Daily Caller show. So I'm sure he thought, like,
Daily Caller,
easy.
Softballs down the center of the
right
plate.
Wing, I'm right
I got
wing.
this.
It's all going to be good,
Easy
right?
peasy.
But one of the hosts is left wing, and one of the hosts, Jason Nichols is his name, is apparently very effective and did his research. And there's a little moment here we want to show you where Dave is very clearly hit with his own inconsistency and hypocrisy. Let's take a listen to that.
So you describe yourself as a classical liberal. And as such, you're against, I'm assuming, mandating masks and vaccines, even if they can be effective in protecting public health, because that would interfere with personal liberties of what to do with your body and life. Yet in your book, you oppose the legalization of Schedule I drugs because addiction hurts communities. Why are you willing to sacrifice the civil liberties in one case for the public good, but not in the other?
So when I talk about the drug part, it's like, yeah, I'm for legalizing marijuana. I'm not for mandating that everyone smokes it. I'm for legalizing most psychedelics. But then there's another class of drugs, basically, that are so highly addictive. We all know about, I'm sure you guys cover the fentanyl problem we have in the United States, the heroin problem. I was just in New York City, the amount of people that you see on the streets that are just laying there that are obviously on drugs. You go to San Francisco, go to most progressive cities, that you just unfortunately have to balance people's ability to make choices for themselves with some level of public good.
So here's the thing, Vince and Dave. Like, the classical liberal position is that individual liberty is paramount, and there's nothing more that has to do with your own liberties and freedoms is what to do with your own body. So if you are going to say that I can't ingest whatever it is in my body, I think the classical liberal position would be, where does it stop? Can I not drink a big gulp because, it may harm my body and they say sugar is addictive? Where does this actually stop? So my question to Dave is really about how he identifies as a classical liberal or even a libertarian when you're saying that there should be these strict guardrails. And then again, when we're talking about ingesting drugs, that's what I'm putting into my own body. But when we're talking about COVID, that is something that could affect the people around me. So that's a little bit different. And so I'm trying to understand how it is you marry those things.
So there's a couple things to point out there. First of all, the point he makes there at the end is really important. Like, if anything, the argument cuts even more against Dave, because when you're talking about drugs, you're mostly only hurting yourself.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about a vaccine, and this is why the politics are more complicated, or the principle is more complicated, because you have a couple things in conflict. You have people's individual rights and liberties, but then you also have you not getting a vaccine is having an impact on all the people around you.
Or if you're unvaccinated, you not wearing a mask.
Exactly.
Right.
So
yeah.
What I like about the way he approaches this, though, is rather than debating the policy and getting into that back and forth, he shows, like, well, here's what you said on this issue.
He goes to first principles, right?
And this does not square remotely with what you're saying over here now that this is a convenient political position to take for you.
Yeah, so the first thing I love about that is that dude, Jason's his name, right?
Yeah.
He clearly either read Dave's book or read portions of Dave's book.
Yes.
So I like
Prepared.
that up front, because he's like, well, let me see what this guy's actually about. And then he's like, this doesn't make any sense. And then he presents it to him. And of course, the argument is, well, you're completely against safety regulations for a virus, but you're for safety regulations with drugs. And understand something, guys. There is no nuance in the commentary of Dave Rubin. Dave doesn't hit you with like, well, here's generally where I stand, but here's some caveats and some hedges. He was all in on like the full-on classical liberal / libertarian, get the government out of my life type stuff. And listen, it doesn't square. He catches him in a clear contradiction. And then there's one point where I was just like, God, Dave is so dumb. It's embarrassing. I actually wrote down what he said, because it's just like, how does the light bulb not go off when you hear this, when you hear yourself saying these words?
Totally inconsistent.
He says, and I quote, "You just unfortunately have to balance people's ability to make choices for themselves with the public good." That is literally everything everybody says about safety regulations for a virus that you mock and you laugh at and you swat aside and you call stupid. That's why Dave Rubin is a joke. There's no consistency. There are no actual first principles. He's a partisan hack working backwards from his conclusions.
Yeah, well, and it is amazing that I don't even think he realizes.
He doesn't. That's why it's so amazing and sloppy and sad.
Yeah, that what he's saying is actually just making the point.
Right.
That Jason is making there. Like, unfortunately, you do have to balance these things. Oh, really, Dave? Do you now?
This reminds me when I was debating Michael Knowles, who I think is also with the Daily Wire.
This is Daily Caller.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So Michael Knowles, I think, is with the Daily Wire, not the Daily Caller, so different outlets. But I laid this trap for him, and he just, like, pranced right into the trap and didn't even realize he was in the trap, as the audience was like, you're in a trap.
Right.
It was the most hilarious thing ever. I think it was with something about being pro-life, and I was like, oh, I'm glad to know you're against the death penalty. And he was like, oh, I'm for the death penalty. I was like, this is going to be really easy if you just prance into my traps all day. Like, this is hilarious.
There are a couple other things to note about this on the sort of theatrical level. Again, the reason why I think he was not really expecting this to be a challenging interview is because you can see kind of like the deer in the headlights look. At one point, there's like a really hard swallow, like, gulp. Now I have to actually think and defend myself here. The other thing that was interesting is, I mean, I hadn't heard of this show before. I'm going to follow Jason because he seems like a really intelligent and interesting person who clearly does his homework and his research before he conducts these interviews. This segment, which of course they hype up, oh, we got special guest Dave Rubin on YouTube. It has 852 views. So Rubin not exactly bringing in the viewers for their program. It's going to get a lot more views on Twitter, I think, than it ultimately got.
I can't really make this criticism because I genuinely think I'm being destroyed by the YouTube algorithm and my views are lagging to the point where, like, I'm embarrassed by it. So I can't necessarily make that criticism, but point taken. I mean, but what does he expect to happen when you totally switch ideologies within a short time span? You built an audience with one general philosophy, and then all of a sudden you completely flip that philosophy, and you're also just not bright in the process of flipping your philosophy. The thing I can't get over is Dave has always portrayed himself as like, I'm the ideas guy. Like, I'm all about ideas, and I'm all about open discussion and discourse and free speech. And, like, this is what intellectuals do. And then literally anybody on the left who would challenge him, if Dave knows that this person is going to challenge me, he runs and hides. You know, he ran from Michael Brooks. He runs from Sam Cedar. He runs from anybody who would actually, like, go after him, and Dave knows that this person would go after him. And, of course, his dodge is, well, they're smear merchants. Anybody who's, like, harshly critical of me is by definition a smear merchant. So anybody who he talks to who is nominally on the left is somebody who's there to play patty cakes with him and say, oh, isn't the right correct about everything? And then so now, perfect example, goes on the Daily Caller where he's expecting to get a totally softball interview, and he maybe didn't realize it was like a crossfire type show.
Remember that interview he did with Marianne Williamson?
Oh my God, Marianne Williamson ran circles around him in the most, like, condescending, motherly way too. Like, oh honey, oh honey, oh baby, I'm so sorry, you don't know what you're doing.
Way, she just utterly destroyed him, and it was probably the same thing. Like, he probably bought into all the media crap about how she was just some wacko Krystal lady. And then she comes and is ready to just completely run circles around him.
One more thing about this, the host also totally checkmates him on the issue of imperialism. He reads a passage from Rubin's book to him, which basically says something to the effect of, the United States is not an imperialist nation. And then he reads through a list of, like, well, what do you think this country and this country and this country and this country and this country would say about that? All countries that we, you know, there was either a CIA coup or we waged a war against them and overthrew the government and put in a puppet dictator. And Dave's reaction is effectively,
yeah, he's got nothing.
Yeah, and, you know, at the end of it, the guy's basically like, just because the U.S. has done imperialistic things, that doesn't mean other nations haven't done it. Because I think that was Dave's dodge, is to be like, well, others were worse or something. Like, oh, the British Empire, look at what they... Okay, that doesn't take away anything from the point about America. That's a complete red herring.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I always respect people, even if I disagree with them, if I think that they are... operating in good faith, if I think that they're honest, and if I think that they're consistent. Well, that's right. And so if I see, so sometimes, like, libertarians,
right?
You see, like, okay, listen, on economics, I think you're insane, but at least you're applying your free market principles and your individual liberty principles over here on civil libertarian issues, on
and war,
spying and war
right.
and those sorts of things. And I can be like, okay, well, look, I get where you're coming from, and at least I can work with that because there's a consistent principle at play. With Rubin and with the next gentleman we're going to discuss, everything is just about, well, how do I align with whatever the Republican Party stands
with my tribe,
for right now?
My tribe. I'm a tribal idiot.
Yeah, and I'm just going to work backwards to defend it based on wherever I'm supposed to be based on the National Republican Party narrative.